The day my parents blamed me for ruining my sister's engagement party was the day I finally understood what being invisible truly meant. I stood there, holding a shattered glass tray in my trembling hands, watching everyone stare at me as if I had committed some unforgivable sin. Sienna's perfect smile twisted into a wounded expression, and my mother's voice cracked through the silence. Stephanie, why can't you ever be careful? You always ruin things. That moment wasn't new. It was just the loudest echo of a pattern I'd been living in for 28 years. My name is Stephanie Brooks, and I grew up in a house where fairness was just a word printed on classroom posters, not something that existed inside our walls. From the outside, we looked perfect. My father, a respected engineer. My mother, a quiet homemaker with impeccable manners. And then there was Sienna, the golden child. She was everything I wasn't. Graceful, outspoken, endlessly praised. When teachers said she was gifted, my parents nodded proudly. When I brought home straight A's, they barely looked up from their phones. I used to think love was a scoreboard, that if I tried harder, they'd finally notice me. But no matter how many times I helped in the kitchen, took care of chores, or defended Sienna from her own mistakes, the result was always the same. Sienna was right. I was wrong. When we were little, I remember building a small cardboard puppet theater for a school project. I spent hours cutting, gluing, painting. Sienna came in, asked to help, and spilled an entire jar of glitter all over it. When my mother walked in and saw the mess, she didn't ask who did it. She just sighed and said, "Stephanie, you should have been more careful with your sister around." That's how it always started, with small injustices that didn't seem worth fighting. But over the years, those moments became the architecture of my silence. By the time I was 15, I'd learned that my feelings didn't fit into our family narrative. Sienna's tears were emergencies. Mine were inconveniences. I remember sitting at the dinner table one night while Dad talked about Sienna's dream of becoming a journalist. He told her, "You've got that spark. People listen when you talk." Then he turned to me. "And you, Stephanie, you're dependable." Quiet. "Maybe something practical for you, like accounting?" It wasn't an insult, but it landed like one. Because he wasn't just defining careers. He was defining worth. I kept trying. Birthdays, holidays, every family gathering. I'd show up, hoping one day something would shift. But favoritism doesn't fade with time. It matures. It evolves. By the time Sienna got engaged, she was practically a celebrity in our family. Her fiancé, Caleb, was charming, confident, the kind of man my mother adored. I was genuinely happy for her at first, until I realized her engagement had become another way for my parents to measure me. "Stephanie, when will it be your turn? Maybe if you went out more?" "You're so focused on work. Men don't like that." Every question was a reminder that my worth was conditional, always compared, never recognized. At that engagement party, when the tray slipped from my hands and shattered, I watched years of quiet resentment explode inside me. I wasn't angry because of the accident. I was angry because it didn't matter what I did. Whether I succeeded or failed, I was always the one to blame. After the guests left and the silence settled, my father pulled me aside. "You embarrassed your sister tonight," he said coldly. "She deserves her moment, Stephanie. Try not to make everything about you." That was when something inside me cracked, not loudly, but permanently. For days afterward, I replayed that night in my mind. Not the glass shattering, but their faces. How quickly they turned against me, without question, without hesitation. How familiar that felt. I realized I had spent my entire life begging for a seat at a table that was never meant for me. So I made a promise to myself. If I was going to keep being invisible, it would be on my own terms. I started saving money. Every paycheck, every bonus. I worked 2 jobs. One as an assistant at a design firm, another freelancing online at night. I didn't tell them. For the first time, I didn't explain myself to anyone. Sienna called occasionally, complaining about wedding stress and how mom and dad expect too much. Each time, I listened. offered advice, and hung up feeling strangely hollow. It wasn't jealousy. It was the realization that even when she struggled, she still had their full attention. Meanwhile, my successes, a promotion, a small apartment, financial independence, were met with polite indifference. "Good for you, honey," my mother said once, scrolling her phone mid-conversation. But the truth about emotional neglect is this: it doesn't make you heartless, it makes you hungry. For validation, for fairness, for a moment where you finally get to be the protagonist in your own story. I began journaling everything: memories, feelings, moments I'd buried. And one night, reading through those pages, I realized something terrifying and freeing at once. My parents didn't hate me, they just never saw me. And the hardest part? Neither did I. That was when the idea of deciding started to take shape. Not revenge in the traditional sense, but a choice that would rewrite the quiet story of my life. For the first time, I didn't want to prove them wrong. I wanted to prove me right. I looked in the mirror and said it out loud: "I'm done being the one they blame." It felt strange, almost rebellious, like claiming ownership over a name I'd never truly owned before. That night, I fell asleep with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years, but I had no idea that the path ahead would test me in ways I wasn't ready for. That my decision to walk away would become the one thing that would finally force them to see me. I used to think every family had a favorite, that somewhere, deep down, parents just connected more with one child, and maybe that was normal. But the older I got, the more I realized favoritism isn't just love distributed unequally. It's love weaponized, a currency used to control, divide, and silence. Growing up, my parents never raised their voices at Sienna. Even when she broke rules, they'd find ways to justify it. "She's young," Mom would say softly. She didn't mean it. But when I made the smallest mistake, forgetting to take the trash out or getting a B+ instead of an A, the atmosphere changed instantly. Dad's disappointment wasn't loud, but it was heavy. He didn't need to yell. His silence was enough to make me crumble. When I was 12, Sienna took $50 from Mom's purse to buy a new bracelet. Mom found out, and instead of punishing her, she said, "Next time, just ask me, sweetheart. You don't need to sneak around a week later." I borrowed the same amount from the drawer to pay for a school trip. I left a note promising to return it. When they found out, I was grounded for 2 weeks. That's when it really sank in. In our house, justice had a name, and it wasn't mine. It wasn't that Sienna was cruel, at least not at first. She was used to being adored, used to being believed. Why question the system when it benefits you? She'd often say things like, "Steph, you're so sensitive," or "You always make things dramatic." At the time, I thought she was right. Maybe I was too emotional. Maybe I was the problem. That's how emotional gaslighting works. It doesn't shout. It whispers until you doubt your own memories. By the time we reached high school, the dynamic had solidified. Sienna was the charismatic social butterfly. I was the quiet one, the responsible sister who cleaned up after everyone else. Our parents loved telling stories about her, her achievements, her charm, her popularity. At dinner parties, they'd gush, "Sienna just got nominated for editor of the school paper." "Oh, she's so confident. We never have to worry about her." And then, as if to balance the narrative, they'd look at me and say something like, "Stephanie's doing well too?" She's very helpful around the house. Helpful, not talented, not exceptional. Just helpful. It's funny how a single word can build a lifetime of resentment. One day, I overheard my mother on the phone with my aunt. She said, "Sienna has that spark, you know? She's destined for something big. Stephanie's more stable. She'll always be fine stable." I remember that word echoing in my head. It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like a sentence. When we were 16, Sienna got into her dream internship at a local magazine. Dad threw a party to celebrate. Friends, neighbors, extended family. The house was full of laughter. The next month, I won first place in a regional design competition. No one mentioned it. Mom said, "That's nice, honey," and went back to chopping vegetables. I didn't expect balloons or applause, just acknowledgement. But silence became their favorite language. That silence turned into something darker when it came to blame. Sienna could twist any situation, and somehow, I'd always end up the villain. Like the night she crashed my car. She'd taken it without asking, went out with friends, and rear-ended another vehicle. When Dad found out, she burst into tears. "I only took it because Stephanie said it was fine." I stood there stunned. I hadn't said anything of the sort, but by the time I opened my mouth, the verdict had already been passed. Dad's voice thundered for the first time in years. "Stephanie! How could you be so irresponsible?" I tried to explain, but the more I spoke, the more defensive I sounded. And in that house, defending yourself was the same as lying. Sienna never apologized. She didn't have to. She knew they'd protect her no matter what. That was the night I learned something important about people who always get believed. They stop fearing consequences. And those who are never believed, they stop speaking altogether. I started spending more time in my room, drowning in sketchbooks and design ideas. Drawing became my escape, my only safe space. While Sienna lived her life out loud, I built mine in silence. At school, teachers loved my art, my sense of detail. One even said I had a gift. But when I told my parents, Dad chuckled. "Art's a hobby, Steph. Not a career." Sienna jumped in. "She's just being practical, Dad." "We can't all be dreamers." The table erupted in laughter. Except me. You'd think I'd grow numb to it, to the way they dismissed me. But the truth is, you never get used to being unseen. You just get better at hiding the pain. When Sienna went off to college, things got quieter, easier. The tension in the house eased, not because we healed, but because the storm had left. For the first time, I had my parents to myself. I thought maybe, finally, I'd have a chance to build a real relationship with them. But favoritism doesn't vanish with distance. It lingers like smoke long after the fire's out. When she called, they'd rush to answer. When I called, they'd say, "We'll call you back later, sweetheart." Sometimes they didn't. I tried to bridge the gap. I sent gifts, helped around the house when I visited, cooked dinner. But even my kindness became ammunition. One Christmas, Sienna came home unexpectedly late. I had decorated the whole living room, lights, tree, everything. When she walked in, Mom hugged her first and said, "Oh, good, Sienna. Look what Stephanie did for you." For you, not for us. Not for the family, for her. It was such a small phrase, but it carried decades of imbalance. As we grew older, I started to notice something else. How favoritism breeds entitlement. Sienna began expecting things: money, attention, forgiveness. And my parents gave it willingly. Meanwhile, I became the responsible fallback, the one who fixed problems quietly. If a bill was late, I covered it. If something broke, I replaced it. Not out of obligation, but because I couldn't stand to see them struggle. Even after everything, I still wanted their approval. That's the cruel paradox of being the neglected child. You spend years trying to earn the love that should have been given freely. One night, a few years later, I came home from work exhausted. Sienna was visiting for the weekend. I overheard her and Mom talking in the kitchen. Mom said, "You know, Sienna, you have such a good heart." "You always think about us." Sienna smiled and replied, "Well, I try. I just wish Steph would be more involved." That hit me like a slap. I was the one paying half their bills without them even realizing it. I was the one calling to check if they'd eaten, if they'd taken their medication. But because I didn't perform my love loudly enough, it didn't count. That night, I went to my room and cried for the first time in years. Not out of sadness, but out of realization. No matter what I did, I'd always be the background character in their story. And yet, part of me still couldn't let go. Because walking away isn't just leaving people behind. It's leaving behind the version of yourself that still believes they'll change. By the time I turned 26, I had built a quiet, stable life for myself. Steady job, small apartment, some savings. But deep down, I knew stability wasn't the same as peace. Every time Sienna called, it was to talk about herself. Every time my parents called, it was to talk about Sienna. I'd listen, smile, respond politely, and hang up, the same way you'd deal with an old wound that still aches when it rains. Until one day, I'd finally had enough. But that part, the moment everything shifted, came later. For now, I just want you to understand the depth of what it feels like to be invisible in your own home. Because once you do, you'll understand exactly why I did what I did next. The strange thing about emotional neglect is that you don't always recognize it while it's happening. You normalize it, make excuses for it, until one day, it stops feeling like love and starts feeling like survival. By the time I turned 27, I was exhausted. Not physically, but emotionally. I'd spent years walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace in a war no one would admit existed. My parents still called me sweet, helpful, so responsible. They thought those words were compliments. But what they really meant was, you never complain. You never make it hard for us to love Sienna more. Sienna, on the other hand, was thriving, at least from the outside. She'd married Caleb, the same man from the engagement party years earlier. They had the kind of relationship that looked perfect on social media. Smiling photos, vacations, little, "we're so blessed" captions. But behind those curated moments, there were cracks I could see. Cracks my parents refused to. She'd call me late at night sometimes, crying about Caleb's temper or how he made her feel small. I'd listen, comfort her, give her advice, even though part of me wanted to scream, "Now you know how it feels to be invisible." But I didn't, because that's who I was. The fixer, the listener, the emotional punching bag. Then, one evening, Mom called out of nowhere. Her voice was trembling. "Stephanie, your father's been laid off. We're we're in a bit of a situation." I felt that old instinct rise, to fix, to help, to carry their burdens quietly. I offered to send some money until they got back on their feet. She hesitated. "Oh no, dear, that's not necessary. We'll be fine." But 2 weeks later, she called again, this time with her voice barely holding steady. "Steph, if it's not too much trouble, could you help us with rent this month?" Just until your father finds something, of course I said yes. It was never really a question. I started sending money regularly, sometimes half my paycheck. I didn't tell anyone, not even Sienna. For months, I kept it up, quietly, consistently. Until one day, Dad called. He sounded lighter, almost proud. "You'll never believe it," he said. "Sienna's been such an angel. She's been helping us out financially. Said she didn't want you to worry," my breath caught. I remember sitting in stunned silence, my phone pressed against my ear, my heart pounding. Sienna? She hadn't sent them a dime. I had. But in their story, she was the savior. And I didn't even exist. That was the moment the ground shifted under me. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the lie. It was the fact that she'd taken credit for something she knew I was doing. I called her that night. She answered cheerfully, like nothing was wrong. "Hey, Steph!" "What's up?" I went straight to the point. "Why did you tell Mom and Dad that you've been helping them?" There was a pause. Long, heavy, suffocating. Then she laughed softly. "Oh, come on, Steph. It's not a big deal. They were worried, and I just didn't want them to know you were struggling too." "Struggling?" I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not struggling, Sienna. I've been helping them. With my money. My savings." Another pause. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Well, if it makes them happy to think it's from me, why does it matter?" That line burned into my brain. Why does it matter? It mattered because I had spent my entire life being erased, and now she was erasing even the good I had done. I hung up without saying another word. For days, I walked around feeling like a ghost in my own story. The anger wasn't loud. It was cold, quiet, and sharp. The kind of anger that doesn't explode. It crystallizes. A week later, Mom called again. excited this time. "You won't believe it! Sienna just helped us pay off the last bit of the car loan. She's such a blessing." I wanted to tell her the truth right then, to shatter the illusion. But something stopped me. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the realization that no matter what I said, they'd never believe me. Because when people have already written you into the role of the problem, your truth sounds like rebellion. So I stayed silent, but inside, something was changing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to win their approval. I was studying it, understanding it, so I could finally break free from it. A few months later, Sienna invited me to her house for dinner. She said she wanted to catch up. I almost didn't go, but a small part of me wanted to see her face, to understand how she could lie so easily. Her house was beautiful, big windows, perfect decor, the kind of warmth you can buy. She greeted me with a hug, and for a moment, I almost believed it was real. Over dinner, she talked about herself, as always, her job, her husband, her new car. Then, casually, she said, "I can't believe Mom and Dad still struggle with money sometimes." I swear, if I didn't step in, they'd lose that house. I set my fork down slowly. "Do they know where the money really came from?" She smirked. "Steph, don't start. They've been through enough. Just let them think what they want." I stared at her. At this person I used to protect, defend, even envy. And I realized something painful. Sienna wasn't cruel by accident. She was cruel because she'd been taught she could be. After that night, something in me hardened. Not out of hatred, out of clarity. I finally saw my family for what they were, a hierarchy built on illusion. And I decided, if they loved illusions so much, I'd give them one they'd never forget. I started preparing quietly. I stopped sending money. I redirected my support towards something else, my own life. I poured every ounce of energy I used to give them into my work, my art, my peace. Weeks passed, then months. My parents called less frequently, and when they did, it was mostly to talk about how Sienna's been so generous lately. I'd smile politely, say, "That's great," and change the subject. It was almost fascinating to watch how easily people build altars around lies. One day, I got a message from Mom. "Sweetheart, we'd love for you to come by this weekend. We're having a little family dinner." I knew what that meant. It was Sienna's idea. Against my better judgment, I went. When I arrived, the house looked different. Cleaner, brighter, like it was trying to convince me things were perfect again. Sienna was there, of course, smiling like a host who owns every heart in the room. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Small talk, laughter, polite questions. Then Mom said it. "Sienna, we can't thank you enough for all your help these past months. You've been our guardian angel." Sienna smiled, feigned humility, and said, "Oh, you know I'll always take care of you." I looked at her, then at my parents, and felt the weight of years press down on me. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt powerful, because I knew the truth, and they were still prisoners of a lie. I wanted to say something then, to expose her, to finally reclaim my narrative. But I didn't. Not yet. Because revenge, I realized, wasn't about shouting the truth. It was about letting the truth find them when it hurts the most. That night, I went home and began planning what I'd eventually do. Not to destroy them, but to free myself. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold yet. But one thing was certain. The day they discovered who had really been holding them up all along, they would finally see me. Sometimes freedom doesn't come with a grand announcement. It comes quietly, in the form of a decision no one sees coming. For me, it started one Sunday morning. The sunlight fell through the blinds, soft and golden, but I felt nothing. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, reading yet another group text from my family about Sienna's latest act of kindness. She'd apparently helped our parents pay for a new water heater, the same one I'd already paid for weeks earlier. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones and whispers, "You don't have to keep proving your worth to people who refuse to see it." That was the morning I decided to stop trying. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I started small. I stopped answering calls that began with, "Can you do me a favor?" I stopped sending money. I stopped explaining myself. And with each boundary I built, I felt lighter, like I was finally stepping into a life that had room for me. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. My apartment slowly filled with canvases, colors, and light, a world that was mine, untouched by judgment or comparison. It wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who I was before their version of me took over. Months passed, and life began to take shape in a new rhythm. I met new people, kind, curious souls who saw me for my energy, not my history. They didn't know about Sienna. They didn't know about the family drama. They just knew me, and for the first time, that was enough. But life has a way of testing your growth. One evening, I got a voicemail from Mom, her voice shaking. "Stephanie, please, call us back. It's your father." My heart dropped. I drove to their house without thinking. When I arrived, the scene was painfully familiar. Sienna's car already parked outside, her presence commanding the room. Dad was okay, just recovering from a mild heart scare. But the tension in the air was thick. As soon as I walked in, Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Stephanie! I'm so glad you came." Sienna was so quick to rush over. She even helped pay for his medication. There it was again. That same script, that same lie. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't correct her. I just smiled faintly and said, "That's great, Mom." Because now I understood something powerful. You can't wake people who are in love with their dreams, even if those dreams are built on lies. Over the next few weeks, I helped quietly. I brought groceries, cooked meals, made sure Dad had what he needed. And still, every bit of gratitude went to Sienna. It didn't hurt anymore. It almost made me laugh. Because while they were busy praising her, I was already building a life so far beyond their smallness that their opinions couldn't reach me. Sienna, however, noticed. She started sensing the shift, the calm in me that didn't need her validation anymore. And it bothered her. One afternoon, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked polished, confident, but her eyes carried a hint of unease. "Steph," she said, stepping inside without waiting, "we need to talk." I gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "I don't get it," she said. "Mom said you've been acting distant." I smiled lightly. "I've just been focusing on my life." She crossed her arms. "You're angry at me, aren't you?" "Because of the money thing?" I met her eyes. "No, Sienna. I'm not angry. I'm done," she repeated, frowning. "Done trying to make you understand how much I've done for this family. Done explaining myself. Done carrying guilt that doesn't belong to me." For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just stared, as if realizing that her favorite mirror had stopped reflecting her image. "You can keep pretending," I said softly, "but the truth always has a way of catching up." "It doesn't need my help," she laughed, but it sounded nervous. "Wow, you've really changed, huh?" I nodded. "Yeah." Finally, after she left, I sat by the window and felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. Not the kind that comes from fixing everything, but the kind that comes from letting things break and knowing you'll be okay anyway. That night, I wrote something in my journal that became my mantra. My revenge will be my peace. And I meant it. Over the next few months, everything shifted. My art career took off in ways I never expected. I held my first small exhibition, and it sold out. I even received an offer to collaborate with a gallery overseas. The world was opening, and for once, it had nothing to do with my family name. Mom and Dad congratulated me, of course. But there was a subtle distance now. They didn't understand this version of me, the one who didn't beg for approval, who didn't need their permission to exist. One evening, I got a text from Mom. "We're so proud of you, sweetie. Sienna said she always knew you had it in you." I smiled, not bitterly, but with acceptance. Of course she did. The difference now was, I didn't need them to know the truth, because I did. And that's when the idea for my real revenge began to form. Not the kind that screams, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that reveals, silently, inevitably. Something was coming, not out of cruelty, but out of justice. And when it did, every mask would fall. It's strange how life delivers justice, not with thunder or applause, but with quiet timing. Sometimes the universe waits until you've stopped caring, and then it gives you exactly what they said you'd never have. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when the first crack appeared. Mom called, her voice shaking. "Steph, your sister needs help. She's in trouble." I froze. Trouble? Sienna? The same sister who seemed untouchable? What happened? I asked. Mom hesitated, then sighed. She made some bad investments. Her husband's company went under. They're struggling, Stephanie. We don't know what to do. I closed my eyes. There it was. The cycle flipping. When I arrived at my parents' house, the air was thick with anxiety. Sienna sat at the kitchen table, eyes red, hands trembling. Papers and bills were scattered everywhere. When she looked up, her expression softened. Maybe from exhaustion, maybe from guilt. "Steph," she whispered, "I don't even know where to start." I walked over slowly, setting my bag down. "Then start with the truth," I said gently. She looked away. I lied. About the money. About helping Mom and Dad. I let them believe it was me. Her voice cracked. I just wanted them to be proud of me for once. For a moment, silence filled the room. Heavy, but honest. Mom's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Sienna's tears fell fast now. "It wasn't me. It was Steph. She's the one who sent the money all those years. She's the one who helped Mom turn toward me, disbelief flickering across her face. Is that true?" I nodded quietly. I didn't want credit. I just wanted to help Dad's voice, weak but steady, cut through the silence. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I met his eyes. "Because it wouldn't have changed anything. You'd already decided who the good daughter was." The words hung there, sharp, undeniable. For once, no one argued. No one dismissed me. No one told me I was overreacting. The truth had finally spoken for itself. Sienna sobbed softly. "I'm sorry, Steph. I really am. I wanted to hate her." But looking at her, broken, stripped of the perfection she'd always worn like armor, I felt something else instead. Relief. Because the game was finally over. Mom reached out, her hand trembling. "Stephanie, we didn't know." I took a slow breath. "I know you didn't. But now you do." And with that, I stood. No screaming, no dramatic exit. Just peace, the kind that comes when the truth finally lands where it belongs. That night, as I drove home, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. Years of resentment, humiliation, and silence, all dissolving into something lighter. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need them to see me as the good daughter, because I had already rewritten that story on my own terms. A week later, Mom called again. She wanted to visit my apartment, just to talk. When she arrived, she walked slowly through the space, pausing to look at my paintings on the walls. Her eyes softened. "They're beautiful," she said quietly. "You really built something special here." I smiled. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "We should have seen it sooner." I didn't reply. Sometimes silence says everything words can't. Before she left, she placed a small envelope on my counter. Inside was a photo. Me and Sienna as kids, sitting side by side on the front porch. On the back, in Mom's handwriting, were just 4 words. "We see you now." For the first time in my life, those words didn't make me cry. They made me breathe. From that day forward, I stopped calling what happened revenge, because it wasn't about payback anymore. It was about truth finding its voice, even if it took years. My parents never became perfect. They never could undo the damage, but they tried, in small, clumsy ways. Sunday calls, birthday cards, asking about my art. And I met them halfway, not out of obligation, but choice. Because healing isn't about rewriting the past, it's about refusing to let it define your future. Sienna eventually rebuilt her life too. We didn't become best friends overnight, but something shifted. She stopped pretending. She started listening. And once, over coffee, she looked at me and said, "You were always the strong one, Steph." I just didn't see it. I smiled. Neither did I. Until I had to. In the years that followed, I learned that the loudest revenge is not anger, it's peace. It's waking up one morning, sipping coffee in the quiet of your own space, knowing you didn't let bitterness win. Because real power isn't proving them wrong, it's knowing you never needed their approval to be right. So when people ask me about my family now, I don't tell them the full story. I just say, we all learned what love isn't, and that's how I finally found what it is. And if you've ever been the invisible one, the one left out, blamed, or compared, remember this: you are not invisible. You are simply growing where they never thought to look. Have you ever had to walk away from people who never saw your worth? Tell me in the comments. Your story might help someone else find their strength too. It's strange, isn't it? You spend your whole life craving validation from the people who were supposed to give it freely. And by the time they finally offer it, you've already learned to live without it. That's what healing feels like. Not a single grand moment, but a slow, quiet awakening. A realization that peace doesn't come when people apologize. It comes when you stop needing them to. Months passed after that night. The night the truth came out. And something shifted inside me. For the first time, I stopped replaying old memories in my mind, trying to edit them into something kinder. I stopped waiting for closure that would never come in words. Because closure isn't something they give you. It's something you create when you decide the story ends today. I started to notice small things again. The smell of coffee in the morning, the hum of the city outside my window, the way sunlight spills across my painting desk. Every detail felt new. It's amazing how peaceful the world becomes when you're no longer fighting to be understood. I realized that for years, my life had revolved around being the good daughter, the forgiving one, the helper. But underneath that label was someone who just wanted to be seen, not for what she gave, but for who she was. And now, she finally was. My art grew bolder. I stopped painting what I thought people wanted to see and started painting what I felt. One of my new pieces, a portrait of two women sitting back to back, divided by a crack of light, went viral online. People said it felt like forgiveness captured on canvas. And maybe it was, because even though I'd never fully forgive the years of silence, I could forgive myself for staying too long in places where love had conditions. One afternoon, while cleaning my studio, I found that old photo again, the one my mom had left behind. I looked at it for a long time, not with sadness, but gratitude, because that little girl sitting on the porch beside her sister, she never stopped trying to be loved. And now, she finally got it, from herself. Sienna visits sometimes. She still carries guilt in her eyes, but our conversations are real now, unpolished, honest. She asks about my work, my travels, my peace. And every so often, she thanks me, not for money or forgiveness, but for not giving up on being her sister, even when she didn't deserve it. We laugh now too, not the forced, polite kind, but the kind that comes from shared survival, from understanding that, in our own twisted way, we were both just trying to be seen. As for my parents, they're softer now. Age has a way of humbling pride. They call often, not to compare or criticize, but simply to ask, "How are you, sweetheart?" Sometimes I still catch a hint of old habits in their tone, but I no longer take it personally, because I finally understand. They gave love the only way they knew how, and that knowledge is enough. A few months ago, I attended a small art gala in New York. When I walked in, someone whispered, "That's Stephanie. Her story went viral last year." I smiled politely, but what they didn't realize was that the real story wasn't the paintings. It was the girl who learned how to exist without needing applause, Because when you stop living for their approval, you start living for your truth. People sometimes message me after hearing my story. They say, I saw myself in your pain. My family chose my sibling too. I thought I was alone. And every time, I write back the same words. You're not invisible. You were just surrounded by the wrong mirrors. There's a quote I once read. It said, the best revenge is no longer being affected. At the time, I didn't fully understand it. Now, I do. Because my peace isn't proof that they were wrong. It's proof that I survived. And survival, when done with grace, is its own masterpiece. Sometimes I still visit my childhood home. The paint is peeling now, the trees taller than I remember. Sienna and I sit on that same porch, sometimes in silence, sometimes laughing about nothing. And in those moments, I realize, maybe the story was never about revenge at all. Maybe it was about redemption. Not theirs, mine. Before I leave, I always look back one last time. Not out of longing, but gratitude. Because every wound, every silence, every moment I thought I wasn't enough, led me here. To peace. To truth. To myself. If you've ever felt unseen, unwanted, or compared, remember this. You don't need to win their love to prove your worth. Your story doesn't have to start with pain and end with revenge. It can end with peace. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending of all. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, subscribe to Iron Revenge and turn on notifications. Because every week, we share stories that heal, empower, and remind you, you are not alone. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's realizing you were never broken, only hidden. And now, you finally see the light,